Hey guys, welcome back to this episode of The Backstory. What does it actually mean to grow up Palestinian in Europe? Today, we're joined by Lara, a Palestinian born and raised in Germany, who shares her experience navigating identity, belonging, and finding her voice across different spaces in Europe. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. It truly does help us out. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it.
I think this episode has potential to be one of the most powerful so far. And I think the story that we're about to discover is something that is very unique and something that, especially with what's going on in the world right now, really needs to be heard. So thank you so much, Lara, for giving us the time and coming on. I really appreciate it, especially in your busy schedule.
All good.
So yeah, let's get straight into it. I think firstly, I want you to describe for me a little bit how it was like for you to grow up as a Palestinian living in the West. You talked to me a little bit off camera about where you've lived and what sort of experiences you've gathered along that journey. So tell us a little bit about that.
I think, it was a bit difficult, I have to say, growing up, especially because I was born and raised in Germany. In the beginning, it was more during a time with growing Islamophobia, so the focus wasn't really on being Palestinian, but being Muslim. But with time, more and more people learned about Palestine, and it became more and more topical. And it was always a two-sided coin. I never knew how people would react to knowing me being Palestinian. And I was always being warned also at home to be a bit careful with telling people where I'm from, just because you never know who you'll encounter and how they might perceive it.
So your parents would warn you and stuff like that?
Yes, especially after everything they had to endure, and they came from Palestine, so they know how hard it can be. So they wanted us to be more careful.
Yeah.
And afterwards I went to study in the Netherlands, and there I was already being a bit more vocal, but still quite careful with who I talked to about it. And I only really found my voice as a Palestinian when I came to Switzerland, I have to say, and the situation started, and I saw that there's really a need for Palestinians to speak up. And this is where I took Palestine out of my home and I brought it to the world also, because I never experienced Palestine outside of the four walls at home. It was only within family always. Yeah. And yeah.
And how was that experience for you? So you said it was the first time when you actually moved to Switzerland. So are there any things that made that difficult to actually express that outside of the house? And do you have any, experiences or stories from that time?
I think it was just a very, I think it was a very difficult situation, just because I still didn't know how people would perceive it. And I started to talk about what I know about Palestine, but I always had also some type of imposter syndrome, because I never lived there. I don't really experience Palestine the way my parents did, but I know a lot about it, and I know all of the experiences my family members have made. So in the beginning I was a bit afraid to speak up, but then I saw that people are actually interested in knowing how different people, especially also Palestinians in the diaspora, experience life as Palestinians. And this is where I found more courage to also speak about it outside.
So the fact that you've met other people that had also had a similar upbringing. And
Yep.
I think one thing you mentioned to me before was about how Palestinians that grow up in the West, their families usually scattered all around the world. So was it similar for you? And do you have any experiences from that family life or that you can share?
Yes, for us it was the exact same thing. We have still some family in Palestine, of course, but then the majority is scattered all around. We have a lot in Jordan, for example, but also in other parts of Europe, in the US, everywhere actually. And I never had this big family life. I knew about my cousins and aunts and so on, but I mostly knew them through stories. And the first time I actually really met my family was when I turned 17 and I finished high school and I went to Palestine with my dad.
That was the first time?
That was the first time that I actually met them when I was older. Like I saw them when I was a baby, maybe, but that's the first time when I also had the chance to actually get to know them.
And how was that?
It was weird. It was, I mean, you know the people, but you don't really know them, and you know it's family, but also kind of not.
Yeah, probably hard to adjust a little bit, right?
Yes, exactly. And each one of us comes with a different backstory. Like for us, it was Palestinians from Germany, but then you had Palestinians from Jordan, and the way we speak Arabic was also different, and the experiences we made. So we really had to get to know each other also on that level, and it was super interesting, but also kind of sad.
And how do you feel like that shaped your identity? Obviously, growing up in the West, you talked to me a little bit about imposter syndrome, having that at first. Then you met people who had come from a similar background, so it became easier to speak about these topics and get to know people that are, have gone through a similar thing, and you can also relate to them. So tell me a little bit about that experience living in the West. Was it difficult? Were there any stories where you had to kind of think twice before going along that path? Anything, or was it just all amazing?
No, definitely not. There were quite a lot of stories that come to mind if I think about like day-to-day racism, especially when it comes to Palestine. The one story that really stood out to me was when we were in Jordan, which is a country where we also feel at home. And it was me, my dad, my aunt, and my cousin walking through the city center of the capital, so in Amman. And we overheard two tourists from the Netherlands. And of course, we understood them, so we could also talk to them. And we understood that they were looking for a specific restaurant that was quite famous or still is quite famous in Amman. And we offered to show them the way. And on the way, I started talking to the woman. She was super nice. I talked to her that we were living in the Netherlands but came to visit and so on, and that we were originally Palestinian. And at the same time, my dad was talking to her husband. And the whole time he was emphasizing that we are actually from Israel. And afterwards also I overheard them talking to each other, and then the woman actually told her husband they prefer if you say Palestine. And he said, yeah, it doesn't change the fact that it's Israel. So he really stuck to this, and it was really weird to me because I'm used to racism here or xenophobia here because it's also in the West, but to also do it to us when we're in our own countries is a bit extreme to me. Yes.
And even though the conversation you were having with them was something quite casual, and
yes,
you were being quite helpful to them.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, also my dad talked to the owner of the restaurant because we knew him and made sure that they were well taken care of. And this was also strange to me because I felt really offended. And I asked my dad, why did you even be so nice to them? And then he also told me that sometimes as Palestinians, you just have to get used to people thinking that way, and that you probably cannot change it, but it shouldn't change the way you are and you help people. So it was definitely a life lesson that day.
Yeah, it's quite shocking to hear, actually.
Yeah.
And was there anything like that when you moved to Switzerland or even growing up in Europe, or do you think it was more subtle than that?
I think it was a bit more subtle, just because also when I was growing up in Germany or even studying in the Netherlands, I never really emphasized where I was from. And once I started really talking about it here and being Palestinian, also unapologetically Palestinian, it was perceived in a different way, but I was also in a different mindset. So even when people started to be uncomfortable, I drew strength from it rather than letting it make me feel uncomfortable as well. So I think this is something we'll always encounter, but it's just how we deal with it that
important.
counts.
Yeah. And talking about dealing with it, I think you mentioned to me that there were a lot of groups and societies that you joined or were part of or created in order to tackle these issues. So tell me a little bit about what those were and what the main aim was, and whether it was just a protest, which we now see widely, even in the city we're sitting in right now, but was it also more for education? So tell me a little bit about what those societies were.
Actually, this was quite special about my time here in Switzerland, I have to say, because shortly after everything started, it was really also shortly after I moved here, so I didn't know anyone yet. And I saw this group on Instagram called Café Palestine in Zurich, which was established already back in 2010. And they had like cultural events on Palestine, just talking about it, the food, the music, and so on. So I went to my first event early November, and there were a lot of people. It was quite emotional. And it's also the first time I actually ever spoke up. And it was like a Q&A at the end, and I took the mic and I talked about how it was like growing up in Germany as a Palestinian.
Mhm.
And it was perceived in such an like open way, and people were so nice.
And it was the first time you
supportive.
had that feeling.
Yes, it was the very first time. And afterwards, people started coming up to me, also Germans, that apologized for what happened.
Oh wow.
This was really special, and it was also special because it was mostly Swiss people that created this group, and of all ages. So there were older people, younger people, like my age.
That's
also.
an interesting point, because I
Yes.
think the impression is that the local populations in Western countries are maybe more apprehensive towards these
True.
topics. So it's good to hear that they are the ones that were actively part of it and started it. You know?
Yes, yeah, it was super special. And from that, then I met another group of people that wanted to also educate on Palestine, because then you started to hear all of these things on the news, but people were confused. They didn't really know about the history.
Yeah.
So we created this other group called Watermelon University.
Okay.
And there we held different teach-ins on the history, on current events, on everything that came to mind. We also invited people. I don't know if you know Electronic Intifada.
Okay.
And we invited Ali Abu Nama
Okay.
to Switzerland to host an event there. And yeah, it was kind of like very educational, still very topical, but also connected to activism in a way.
Right.
It was a very silent way of activism,
Right.
actually, but it was very powerful.
And that's a good topic you bring up on activism. What do you see its role in Western countries where we are so far away from what's happening, but where we can play a role? And of course, there are two ends of it. I think extremism can be found sometimes in these protests, which doesn't put our activism in the best light. But since you were involved in these groups where you educated people on how to proceed with activism in the best way, what would you advise people to engage in, and what is the best way to be involved in activism?
I think it's important that you just find your own way. Some people really like to be on the streets raising the flags. Some people like to hold speeches, and some people just like to post on Instagram, for example. And you just have to find your own way, also to connect to your talents. If you're a very good speaker, you should speak up also. If you're good at drawing, you can draw for Palestine or for any cause that is important to your heart. But I think it's just important for especially our generation to understand that politics is not passive, and you have a role in it. Even if you're not in a political party, you can still contribute
In some
and
way,
this is and this is super important.
And even the Instagram topic is interesting, because I remember when everyone was posting stories, right, at one point, and it was like the same story being posted. I think you saw a lot of arguments from both sides saying that, oh, posting a story does nothing, and then the other side saying, no, it's better than actually doing nothing. And I think I would say the same. Like, surely something, even if you are just posting it for the sake of it, I still think that's better than not posting it at all. Because even if you're not even reading what you're posting, which can be dangerous, and we'll come to that in terms of the misinformation aspect, but in terms of spreading awareness, I think something is always better than nothing at all. What do you think about that?
Definitely,
Okay, you
definitely.
agree?
Also, I mean, even if you have a private account, you can still post for your close community, because there's always someone who can learn from it.
I think we give ourselves excuses as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, everyone is posting it, so what's the point of me also? We have the same followers as everyone. But I think these are kind of just excuses, right?
Yes, and the more you repost, the more it will be shown to also other people.
Yeah,
So in a way,
exactly.
you are doing something,
Exactly.
but it's just very passive. But
Yeah.
it's still
It still
something.
counts.
Yeah.
let's step away a little bit from the politics, the media, the headlines, all of that. Tell me about what being Palestinian actually means for you. Try to sum it up. What does it actually mean for you?
Being Palestinian is just being proud of my culture. I derive a lot of strength from it also. It's a deep, deep, deep love for your homeland. I think every Palestinian is very connected to their homeland. I think every Palestinian carries a necklace like this or any other reminder of Palestine with them at all times. And there's actually an Arabic word that is always connected with Palestine, which is sumud, which means persistence. Just because over the generations, Palestinians are still persistent and still hopeful that they will return one day. And this is something that I really connect with my culture also.
Mm-hmm. And as a member of the Palestinian diaspora living abroad, do you feel a sense of difference in perception when you tell people that you're Palestinian versus before they know that you're Palestinian? Have you ever, especially living in the West, seen a change when you say those two things? I think even if you ask me, for example, I'm not Palestinian, but when someone tells me they're from Palestine, my mind goes straight to what's happening, right? To the conflict. And so how have you perceived it so far?
Exactly like that. It's always a two-sided coin. Either people get very uncomfortable or they immediately go into pity or support. We really like the support part, of course. The pity part is a bit sad. I mean, we understand why, because you think of war, you think of the situation, you think of the children you see on the news. But sometimes I wish people would just see beyond that and just see us for our culture,
As
for our
humans, right?
exactly, yes, for everything that we love, that we bring to the world also.
And then moving on from that, why do you think people reduce this to a religious conflict without going into the politics and the technicals behind what each side sees as religious and not religious? Why do you think people blame it on that?
I think on the one hand, it's just the easy thing to do. It's easy to blame something that can also help you to distance yourself from it. And especially with Islam, it's easy for people in the West to distance themselves from that, because if you talk about a Muslim being in such a situation or a Christian, they perceive it in a different way. And often, especially in the media, it's used as a driving force, like as a dividing force for people to not care anymore, or to not care at all even about what's going on. And it hides from the fact that it's actually about colonialism and about a settler colonialism issue. And I think it's just a very easy way to get out of the truth.
And to get to the truth, obviously, you need to be educated. You need to also look it up and do your own research, right? So have there been any experiences for you, not just in the West, but overall, where you felt that because of you being Palestinian, there has been a level of difference in treatment in any way?
Definitely. I mean, anytime I go back, I experience it. It's an apartheid state and no one can go around it. If I walk around here, I'm seen as a woman. Like, I'm not really seen as a threat. But as soon as I step foot in Palestine and go through, for example, any of the checkpoints there, I'm automatically seen as a threat. It doesn't matter how tall I am, how strong I am. It's just my mere existence is already a threat there. And I will be treated as a criminal, and I will be treated as less than other people.
And how does that treatment occur? Like, what actually happens?
A lot of humiliation. It's a time where they don't care what nationality you have. It's just looking at you. Just the fact that you have Palestinian blood running through your veins is already enough to be a threat there. You will be held at those checkpoints. You will be humiliated in ways you cannot even imagine. I've had my phone searched through just like that, just because I had also a background of Jerusalem. Um, at some point, I had to take off my shoes, go through the scans, everything, just because we wanted to enter another city in Palestine. And I remember one time when I had to take off my shoes. It was like quite big boots, and it was a brand. And they were still new. I was quite proud of them, actually. And the woman, the soldier at the checkpoint, held up the shoes in a very disgusted way, also as if she's holding the most disgusting thing she has ever seen, just because it was mine. And she looked at them and she was like, "Are those fake?" And I told her, "No, actually not. I just bought them." And she's like, "They look fake." And she puts them down again. And it's just such a weird experience because at the end of the day, I mean, we're the same. Like, you probably also want those shoes, or you have those shoes. So it's a very simple thing to have, but then it can divide you also in such a quick way.
Yeah, it sounds like they were trying to find an issue with everything,
Yeah,
you know, and
definitely.
looking for it and going out of the way to look for it.
Yes.
So, Palestine's been in the news for the last 22 months in particular, quite a lot more than it ever has been. And so I wanted to ask what the impact of that has been on you in terms of how you feel about it, because it's everywhere, you know. Sometimes you can have that feeling that my country is being spoken about 24/7 in not the best circumstances. So, how did you tackle that? And also, how did that make you feel?
On the one hand, I have to say it's nice that more people know about what's happening. It's not an unspoken thing that no one knows anything about anymore. But the way it's portrayed in the media, I have to say, is quite dehumanizing. So I know friends from Gaza, for example, who have seen their families on TV bleeding, unalived, and it's super difficult to still cling to your humanity or your human side after that. And sometimes I also get the feeling that we are only shown as perfect victims in a way. Like, people only talk about us in like the victim setting, and this makes it even more dehumanizing. An example also, I was on the bus 2 days ago, and there was a family, like a mom with her 2 children, and the 2 children didn't want to eat anymore. And then she told them that you should be thankful to have the food because people in Palestine don't have any. And this took me back to my childhood because I heard the same thing: don't waste food because people in Africa are starving.
Yeah.
So now it's being used the same way, but with Palestinians. So it also showed me the way that we are being perceived now and how we perceived people in Africa before, and it's equally wrong, but it's also equally sad.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle, actually, because the Africa thing, even I grew up hearing, we both grew up hearing, and now that's switched to something that is more in the news for the kids nowadays. Oh my God, that's very interesting. So this happened to you on the bus, you said, right? A couple of days ago. So switching on to the perception that other people have of the conflict, what is your opinion on people who maintain complete neutral stances on all of these topics that may seem a little bit complicated, may seem a little bit out there, that you have to do a little bit of your own research to actually know what's going on? What would you say to those people, firstly? And how would you advise them to go about it?
I mean, after 22 months, all I can say is silence is complicity. And in the age of social media, if you don't have 5 minutes of your day to look up what's going on, it tells a lot about you as a person also. It's not that difficult to understand what's happening or to look for a conversation and try to learn more, especially because it's so accessible nowadays. And remaining neutral just because it's the easy way to go is not an excuse, in my opinion.
I agree. I think I've had a few conversations with friends of mine that I've grown up with here through school, and I've heard so many different stances on this. Some say that since our country that we live in is neutral constitutionally that warrants us the right to also continue to be neutral. I've heard stories that I've heard in conversations with people from my school. I've heard excuses about all of this stuff. For example, I've heard people who say that because the country that they're living in is constitutionally neutral, that means that they should also have no stance on anything. And I find that quite ignorant, because we grew up in a country where we have so many privileges. We went to a good school, we had a good education, and we are taught to think constructively and critically about all the things we learned in school. So why not apply that same logic to politics and what's going on in the world? And it's world affairs. I think learning about things and is not as difficult as people make it seem. And another opinion I've heard is that, okay, there's so much misinformation out there, and so therefore every side is biased. And then you try to tell people that, okay, look here, this is a neutral source. They'll be like, no, this is also biased. And then I feel like the person themselves have to want to actually gain information, right?
Yes, 100%.
And I think for me, in those interactions, it's quite difficult, and I've strongly disagreed with people that hold those stances, because I think people who hold those stances also see people that don't in a really weird light. Oh, like, these guys are always posting about this, or these guys are just too involved in what's going on. It doesn't affect my day to day. Like, I'll still eat breakfast in the morning tomorrow, no matter what happens. And I find that so lousy because of the platform and opportunity we've been given living in the West, where luckily we don't have to worry about our next meal. We don't have to worry about what's going to happen to us tomorrow. And we should take advantage of that rather than using that as an excuse not to research, right?
Exactly. One excuse that I've heard a lot also, especially the further we went into the conflict, was I need to take a step back from my mental health, which is such a privilege to be able to do, that makes me feel even more guilty. If I know that my friends around me need to take a step back because of their mental health, but I still know that my people are suffering, and they cannot just say, okay, now I need to pause because my mental health is suffering. It's just this, like, I don't know what to call it even. I like any word for it.
Ignorance.
Actually. Ignorance, exactly. That I simply don't understand. Especially also because it's so easy to do something. Like, you could even just boycott. You don't have to talk. You don't have to be loud about it. You could just boycott the simplest brands. It wouldn't even affect your day-to-day life. And even this is difficult for some people. And I have to say, in those past 22 months, I've evolved so much that I just simply don't take any excuses anymore.
Yeah.
I've cut out friends also because of this, just because they made me feel dehumanized even more than the media at some point. Just because they didn't want to sit down and listen to what's going on, not even from me. They can look at reliable sources, and most of my friends have been to university. They've learned how to do scientific research. They know what to do, and they still refuse to do it, but still want to be friends with me, which felt really weird, because you value me maybe as your friend, but not as a Palestinian. And if I didn't have the privilege of being born here and living here, would you even be my friend?
And I think a lot of it comes down to people wanting to please everyone and just being people pleasers. And you know what? I get it. I've also been like that at certain points when I was younger. But now that I've learned and educated myself, I genuinely believe there's no excuse. And fine, there's steps to it. If you don't want to be the loud one who's posting all the time, no one's asking you to do that straight away. But at least engage, like, do the step one, which is just sit there either on your laptop or reading a book and start to look into it. And I think people will find any reason not to do that. And they'll just be like scrolling on reels, and they'll get their information from there. They'll see some guy talking about the conflict and it seems so complicated, he's using big words, so then they just don't look at it and they shut it out. And I fully agree with the mental health part as well. It's a privilege, and mental health is important. We're not denying that.
Yes.
But using that to excuse your laziness to look into the matter, irrespective of what side, by the way, this is not about picking a side. Even if we have a particular stance for one side, this is just to increase your own personal knowledge about a topic, right? And I think looking into the history can give you that.
Definitely, 100% agree.
new location. I want to start this final segment by asking and kind of looking more to the future, right? What we can do, what's the best way to go forward, how we can increase hope, and kind of want to leave a more positive image. So let me get started by asking what you think is a respectful way of engaging in debates or conversations with people who maybe have different opinions on this topic. And not just in person, because I think sometimes those people don't even approach in person, how you would tackle that in person and also online, because we live in the age of social media, comments, all of this stuff. So how do you see those two different elements?
I think for sure in person it's easier to have a raw conversation about what's happening, especially if you have different opinions, you can discuss them out more easily. Online, I always find it super difficult, I have to say, because sometimes it can be simply a flag that is being posted 1,000 times under a post, and it's not really an argument that's being given of why you stand with that side. So it's super tricky to navigate, but I think the most important part is to distinguish between propaganda of false media and what is going on.
And how do you do that? Like, what do you recommend people on how they can do that?
To really listen to the voices from Palestine or from Gaza right now, because it's the most raw image of what's occurring that you could get. Especially if you have politicians going out there saying or claiming that there's no famine or there's no starvation, and then you see the pictures or you see the actual footage from journalists in Gaza and what they tell and what they say already paints a clear picture, in my opinion. And of course, it's easy to get lost between all the different opinions, but you have to remain critical also about what you know and what can be true and what cannot be true.
And be open to changing your mind about something you already know. Maybe that can change.
Exactly.
Facts can change the truth.
Yes, for sure.
And so, building on from that, what would be one thing that you would want to change about what people see Palestine and Palestinians as? If there's one thing that you could be like, I want to change this thing on how they see us, what would it be?
The biggest thing would be not to see us as the victims anymore, but really to see us for who we are, because we are such a diverse people, and it's such a beautiful country also, that I would love for people to know what it's about. And it is the Holy Land, so it also holds a very important factor for all faiths, actually.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter if you're Muslim or not. So I wish people would focus more on what unites us rather than what distinguishes us also.
Yeah. And speaking of uniting us, living in the West, what is something that keeps hope alive for you when you engage with Palestinians? What's something that you can, even drive a message home for the viewers on how to keep hope alive when sometimes it seems like this will never end in our lifetime? This will just be a topic forever. So what keeps that positivity for you, and what would you advise to others?
At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned Sumut, and I think it's also a good way to wrap it up again, because Sumut is really, like, this persistence is really a very good way to hold on to what you believe in. So this is what gives me hope for the future also, just knowing that I have this persistence, I know what's coming, and I still have this faith of returning at some point. And seeing this shift, especially in the past 22 months, of more and more people speaking up and seeing our side also, gives me even more hope. I think I've never had as many people around carrying the Palestinian flag, for example. And actually, my sister in Germany told me a very interesting story last time. She went to the eye doctor, and they were talking, and he asked her, "Where are you from?" And she told him, "I'm Palestinian." And in that moment, he took out like a Palestinian, like a flag pin from his the coat, like the slab coat. And he told her that usually he wears it more visible also. And I asked, like, the first question I asked her is, how old was he, and was he German? And she told me, yes, it was an old German
guy.
dude. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah, it's nice to see the shift finally.
That's a great shift. Yeah.
Yes.
And more on the same topic of keeping hope alive, maybe share with us, the audience, something, a special tradition, culture, food of Palestine that maybe people don't know about, and something that you enjoy personally as well.
I wouldn't even know where to begin, I have to say. Food-wise, there's a lot of very nice food. I mean, thinking of Palestine itself, if you go to Nablus, you have to eat the knafe. I don't know if you've heard of it. Yes, it's the best there. Falafel, of course. Recently, I was a bit homesick, so I made a dish called msakhan for my friends, or even maklube.
So that's Palestinian as well. Okay.
Exactly, yes. I mean, the Levant.
Okay.
I don't want to
Yes.
cause trouble here.
Yes.
But yes, the food is amazing and it brings people together for sure. What I love about Palestine and Palestinians is also, as soon as we entered Palestine, you can really tell this hospitality. Like the first time I went, we were walking down the old city of Jerusalem, and we were just admiring the old houses because they're more than 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
And this very old woman saw us. She was carrying her groceries, and she was a native, and she saw us looking at the houses, and she immediately invited us in, and she wanted us to stay for dinner.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't know her, but it's also, for me as a Palestinian in the diaspora, it was super interesting to see how much people love to help each other. And it's something I want to take into the future also.
Yeah, very cool. And now to wrap up, I want to ask you for a take-home message. Most of our audience is based quite internationally and based in different countries. But what's something that they can really take from this episode, if there's one thing you want them to remember and to take forward? And also want to ask you about, do you think that the future that you will be telling, in the future you will be telling the stories that you will be sharing with your kids will be different to the ones you heard growing up? So maybe we can talk about that one first, and then I'll get to the final message.
Yes. I mean, in terms of telling the story in the future, I really hope so.
Yeah.
I don't want to raise another generation in this apartheid state. I want them to know liberation. I want them to know Palestine for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to experience the stories that I've only heard from my grandparents in person themselves. Like, I want them to be able to tell their own stories like this. And for the viewers, I think I want them to know that we're more than just what you see on TV. A Palestinian from Jerusalem is completely different than a Palestinian from Gaza or a Palestinian from Tulkarem, where I'm from. We all have our own traditions, things that we're proud of, and our own culture in a way. And we're so diverse, but I don't know, there's a lot of things that we can still tell you or we can show you that we just never get the chance to do. So I wish that at some point I'll be here maybe talking about what makes Palestine special rather than the current situation.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the take-home message is also to not be scared of approaching people that are from the country. Like, they don't bite, and you can speak to them openly about any topic.
Exactly. Just bring us some knafe and we're good.
Then we can make a deal. But anyways, thank you so much for taking out the time. I really appreciate it. And all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too. Ciao, ciao.